All right, let's move on to number 16, just working our way through this review. Okay, so now, again, we defined conjugate. I have an I on the bottom, and it's also too cool for school. It cannot be on the bottom, so I am going to times, well, that's an ugly line. I'm going to times by the conjugate, which is going to be 5 plus I instead of 5 minus I. You're only changing that addition or subtraction sign. You're not changing anything else. All right, so if I do my first part, I have 2i times 5. All right, so that's going to give me 10i, and then 2i times another I. Well, that's going to give me 2i squared. That's going to be my top. And then, well, I'm going to have to FOIL out my bottom. So 5 times 5, well, that's 25, easy enough. And then 5 times I is going to be 5i. Then I'm going to have a negative I. Remember, that negative is attached. So a negative I times a 5 is a negative 5i. And then negative I times a positive I is a negative I squared. So that's my bottom. That's my denominator. When I go to simplify, I'm just going to replace all my I squares with a negative 1. And then I'm going to look, that should be negative. I'm going to look at positive 5i and negative 5i. Yeah, they cancel out. They're going to end up equaling 0. So then I'm going to have 10i on the top, and then I'm going to have plus 2 times negative 1. And then on the bottom, I'm going to have 25 minus a negative 1. Okay, so let's start simplifying even more. Positive times a negative, that's going to equal a negative. So I have 10i minus 2 on the top, and then 25 minus a negative 1, well, that's going to become a positive, and that becomes a 26. Okay, well, there's something very interesting about this. 10 and 2 and 26, they all have a common factor. So I'm going to divide everything by a 2, right? 2 can go into everything. So if I divide everything by a 2, the most simplified I can get is 5i minus 1 all over 13. And this would be my answer. And this is the answer I'm going to be looking for, is the most simplified version of the question. Let's go to 17. 17 is kind of on the same aspect of that, except we just don't have to times by the conjugate. I just don't want that I in the bottom. I really don't care about that 5. That can stay there. So I'm going to actually times I over I to get that I out of the bottom. So 4 times I is 4i, and then 5 times I is going to be 5i squared. But again, we defined I squared as negative 1. Okay, so I'm going to have 4i on top, and then 5 times negative 1. Well, 5 times negative 1 is negative 5. So I'm going to end up with a negative 4i over 5. You can write this several ways. I took the negative on the outside. If you really want to write it, you could write it as negative 4i over 5, or you could write it something as 4i over negative 5. It just depends how you want to write it. Every way is perfectly acceptable, and I will accept any of those answers. So moving on to 18. 18's fun. Remember, it's what's attached to my imaginary and real. My x values are going to be my real. All right, so I'm going to have my real numbers, and then I'm going to have my imaginary numbers over here. So my real number is what's not attached to the imaginary, which is 2. And then my imaginary numbers is what is attached to the imaginary, and it's 3i. So I go 2 over and then up 3. So here's my 2 over, and then I'm going up 3. And here is my dot right here, right there. That's where my dot should be. And that's it. That's all you're doing for any of them. Ooh, 19. Find the absolute value of 4 plus 3i. Well, I know I have a great formula for this. When I have the absolute value of z, where z equals a plus bi, okay, it's going to be the square root of a squared plus b squared. Okay, well, I can identify that. A is going to equal 4 and B is going to equal 3. And now I'm just plugging that in. So I'm going to have square root of 4 squared plus 3 squared. that gives me square root of 16 plus 9, and 16 plus 9 is square root of 25, and square root of 25, well, 25 is a perfect square of 5 and 5, so it just equals 5. And that's it. You kind of get rid of the I when you start the absolute value. That just, that just goes away. So your answer by the end of it should be 5. Now, number 20. It says simplify 38. Well, I know I squared equals negative 1. I know I cubed equals negative I, and I know I to the 4th power equals 1, and we proved that in lecture. So what I'm going to do is 1 is honestly the friendliest number out there, so I'm just going to try to see how many times 4, I don't like that, how many times 4 goes into 38. And so 4, well, it doesn't go into 3 any times, but it does go into 38 about 9 times, which gives you 36. And then I have 2 as my remainder. Well, that 2 actually shows up when I write I of 38. I'm saying that there's going to be 2 left over. And so I of 2, as I defined, is equal to negative 1. So I of 38 equals I to the 2nd power, which then equals I to the negative 1st power. So I want to see something like that. And then you're really done.